Good morning. Good to be here. Really appreciate it. Great to be back in Louisiana. I spent a lot of good years here, both at LSU in Baton Rouge and then at Louisiana Tech up in Ruston. So what I want to do today is just share with you a number of the things that we're doing to help you understand, number one, what's possible. Okay, what is possible. And then what are some of the results from being able to implement intentionally regenerative principles and practices. So my partner Gabe Brown and I founded Understanding Ag, the Soil Health Academy, and a third company called Regenerative. We work with thousands of farmers and ranchers both here in the U.S. and many other countries around the world. And we work with a lot of companies. You see a list up there of companies that are now integrally involved in regenerative agriculture. Okay? We have full-time consulting staff across the U.S., Canada, Mexico, the UK, and Ireland now. And we've consulted in all 50 U.S. states, 47 plus other countries. And in the U.S. right now, we're working across a little more than 36 million acres and a little better than 50 million acres globally. So if you want to have an idea of how fast this is growing and what is happening in the regenerative sector, that gives you a pretty good picture. Now, you've got to have a definition for regenerative agriculture. And this is our definition. We do this every day. And this is how we define it. Farming and ranching in synchrony with nature to repair, rebuild, revitalize, and restore ecosystem function. But here's the key part of the definition. Starting with life beneath the soil surface and extending to life above. So unfortunately, over the last 8+ decades in agriculture, we have sort of forgotten about the soil is supposed to be alive. And that's what we're restoring, is living soil. And I use this quote practically every time I speak by W.C. Loudermilk. And it goes like this: the land does not lie. It bears a record of what men write on it, a record that is easy to read by those who understand the simple language of the land. Everywhere we go, no farmer, no rancher can lie to us about what is actually happening on their farm or their ranch. The moment we begin making observations, and especially the moment we stick a shovel in the ground, your management is revealed. It is revealed very quickly. So make no mistake about it, what we have done and what we are doing is written on the tapestry of the land. So for us, it's all about this. It's all about life. How can we promote, foster, facilitate, and grow more and more life? We do not believe that it has to be agriculture or wildlife, agriculture or ecosystem restoration. We firmly believe, and we know, we don't just believe, we know because of the work that we've done, that you can absolutely have both. And you can have both in abundance. So we also work to do this, to restore a fully functioning carbon cycle. And what we find, and I'm going to focus principally today on what we call adaptive grazing, but what we find is that as we move along the continuum from what we know as continuous or conventional grazing to adaptive grazing, we absolutely begin to see life explode. Again, starting with life beneath the soil and expanding to life above. And through the years that we've been doing this, we have boiled it down to what we now call the 6-3-4. Now, I'm just going to go through this very quickly today. And if you want to learn a lot more, go to our website at understandingag.com. And we've got a lot of information about this and a lot of other things there. A lot of free learning resources for you. But the 6-3-4 starts with the 6 principles of soil health. Now, this originally started with 4 principles, okay? And then the fifth principle of animal integration was added. We added the sixth, which we have made the first, and that is context. And here's why. If you try to apply the other five principles without understanding your context of your individual farm or ranch, you will not succeed, you will fail. These principles cannot be applied outside of proper context. And then we developed what are called the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. And these are quickly the rule of compounding, the rule of disruption, and the rule of diversity. And again, I'm not going to spend time on these today, but you can learn a lot more about them going to our website. We've got podcasts, videos, articles, all kinds of things explaining these in detail. And we implement the principles and the rules specifically to support and to optimize the 4 ecosystem processes: energy flow, capture of sunlight. That's the way we create energy here on this earth. So we got to maximize capture of sunlight. Then the water cycle and the mineral cycle, which today globally are very broken and they need repair. And then finally, there's that word diversity again. Okay, diversity, also known as community dynamics. So I want to share with you a couple of research trials. So I'm still heavily involved in research, even though I'm not formally in academia anymore, but we do a lot of research within Understanding Ag and Regenerative. And I want to share with you a couple of key trials. So this first one, we took more than 150 of the farms in the U.S. that we're working with, and this data here all represents people that are grazing livestock, okay? So these are livestock operations that I'm getting ready to show you. And what we did was we tracked their first 4 years of progress. So year 1 was the year they initially implemented that 634, the principles, the rules to optimize the ecosystem processes. And then year 4 was the 4th year of doing that. So I want to walk you through those 4 years and what happened. So here's some examples of where these farms and ranches were in year 1 at the beginning. We call this the shovel test. The shovel test. And believe it or not, this one thing reveals tons about what's really going on. And the shovel test also changes farmers and ranchers' minds quicker than anything else we can show them. Many have never stuck a shovel in their own soil to truly examine it. Oh, they have shovels and they've stuck shovels in the ground to repair a broken water line or whatever, but not to really look at their soil. So if you look at these soils, these are examples of, again, year 1 at the very beginning. Do you see healthy soil there in those 3 pictures? Yes? No? Stuart? No? Okay, thank you. No. I hope nobody said yes, that these are healthy soils, because they're not. They're plated, they're compacted, they're crusted on top. They have very, very poor aggregate. All of that. Some of these, no aggregate. Okay? So these are not healthy soils. These are dysfunctional soils. So, after 4 years, what can they look like? So I'm going to show you a couple of pictures, and then we're going to show you some data. So after 4 years, these soils were no longer plated and compacted. They didn't have the crusted layer on top. They were deeply aggregated and highly functional. So again, if we look here, we see soils that can infiltrate water very, very readily, retain that water, and their mineral cycle and water cycle is now functioning again. So here's what we found. In year 1, at the end of year 1, after 1 full year of implementation of the principles and the rules, they had built an aggregate depth of 2.3 inches. By year 2, they had increased that to 4.5 inches. By year 3, to 6.2. But look what happened between year 3 and year 4. Okay? So years 1 to 3, that's pretty decent linear progress, right? Would y'all take that? I sure would. Okay, so good linear progress. But in year 4, the mean aggregate depth across all 150 of those had increased to 14.7 inches deep. Stuart, how important is that in terms of soil aggregate? Very important. So, what happened, guys? What happened between year 3 or from years 1 to year 4? Why did we go from linear to exponential? Anybody know? It's called building soil biology and building the right biological profile in the soil. So when we did that, so what happens here is that over that time period, as you build the biology, it takes critical mass to really make the big difference. So years 1 through 3, you're building the critical mass. But then once the biology reaches the critical mass, then you begin to see that exponential result starting to happen. And again, this is very, very predictable. And y'all, here's the deal. It doesn't matter what your climate is. It doesn't matter what your soil type is. It doesn't even matter really what your agricultural enterprise is. It doesn't even matter what country you're in. We have done this on 6 continents now. Okay? So this works. It cuts across all of those boundaries, all of those barriers, if we intentionally apply that 634. So here's also what happened. So I said we saw this leap in biological profile, total living microbial biomass, as measured in nanograms per gram of soil. And we saw a mean increase in total fungi in the soil over that time period of 176%, an increase in mycorrhizal fungi of 153%, an increase in saprophytic of 199%, and an increase in plant species diversity in their pastures and on the rangeland of 123%. Now, what did we not do though in terms of this plant species increase?
Till.
We didn't till. We didn't buy any seed. We didn't plant anything. There was no seed purchased, no seed planted. Every bit of that increase was the result of the response of the existing, or what we call the latent seed bank. Every bit of that across every one of those operations. That's where it came from. We also saw significantly enhanced water infiltration and retention, greater forage biomass production, more plant species, insect and bird diversity, better animal health, enhanced animal performance, better nutrient cycling, and even more important in the challenging times that we're in climatically, greater resilience. Greater resilience. This is at the Snowcrest Ranch, located just south of Virginia City, Montana. And that is, if you're familiar with Montana, this will be in the southwest region of Montana. And we've been working with the Snowcrest Ranch now for 5 years. I want to show you something here because we see this every day, but we didn't believe this was possible within 5 years. So I was there in August of this year, and that was the 5th year that we were doing these measurements. And so we were going in and digging, taking a backhoe and digging soil pits and all of this, and we were measuring root depth, plant root depth, and aggregate depth. Now, when we started with them 5 years ago, they had less than 4 inches of aggregate depth. Okay, so keep that in mind, less than 4 inches of aggregate depth. And when they dug the pit, they'd only gone down a little better than 3 feet deep And I got in and started looking, and roots were going deeper than that, and the aggregate was deeper than that. So I took my shovel and started digging deeper, and I said, hey, this is still going, guys. Go get the backhoe again. So they brought the backhoe back in, and we dug, and we dug, and we dug, and we found roots going deeper than 7 feet, and the aggregate depth was at 7 feet. In 5 years, aggregate depth at 7 feet. So the other things that we noted in that were significantly more plant species diversity, with a lot of natives now showing up. And in that field 5 years ago was smooth brome dominated. Smooth brome dominated. But now it had a lot more plant species diversity and a lot of natives. We saw improved plant morphology, so the same plant species were very different in their morphology, and we're noting that over and over, and better plant phytonutrient content and higher Brix content. This is on one of our clients' farms in upstate New York. Now, they were not included in that 150 farm data set, but I got their data back through the end of 23 and noticed the same trends over the first 4-year period. So if you look across, and you look at, soil pH, and again, there was no liming or soil buffering agent applied. None. So the microbes mediated that pH from 5.7 to 6.9. You'll see organic matter was already pretty good. Many of us in the South would love to have 7.3% organic matter, but it was already pretty good, but over the 4-year period, it got even better. You notice total living microbial biomass and microbes increased significantly, total fungi, mycorrhizal, saprophytic, and protozoal populations all increased significantly over that 4-year period. So that's the first set of data I wanted to show you. The second set, so we did this across several southeastern states. And Cooper Hurst is here, and Cooper's going to be on the panel this afternoon, and he was one of the participants in this study. So we looked at paired comparison farms, one operating regeneratively and the neighbor operating conventionally in Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky. And we had a team of 25 plus scientists that dropped in every year on each of these farms and did a whole host of measurements, ranging everything from what was, soil biology and chemistry and physical characteristics, soil carbon, on and on and on, all the way up to plant, insect, and bird species numbers and diversity, to economics and finances of the operations, animal performance. All of that was included. So this was and so far we've got a dozen peer-reviewed published articles already out, with many more to come on this project. We call it the Roots So Deep Project, and Peter Bick, the award-winning documentarian of Carbon Nation and Carbon Cowboys, is the film producer, filmmaker for this, and it's a 4-part docu-series. So if you haven't seen it, make sure you see Roots So Deep. Okay, it's an outstanding film. So again, we did these paired comparisons, and let me go back. One of the first things we did was installed eddy covariance flux towers on each of these farms, so that we could measure in real time, 24/7, 365, greenhouse gas flux. And these flux towers not only measure that, but they also measure soil temperature and soil moisture on a 24/7 streaming basis, and they're a weather station. So they're measuring everything that's going on from a weather perspective. So we had these deployed, and I've actually got 2 of these on my farm at this point in time as well, and I love the data that it's providing me, because whenever I make a move with any of our species of livestock, it's telling me what that move produced relative to greenhouse gas flux, soil temperature, soil moisture, and so forth. So what we found was that the regeneratively operated farms were a 4 times more powerful greenhouse gas sink compared to the neighboring conventional farms. We also found that the regenerative farms, even though these were next door neighbors, most of them only divided by a fence or two, had 3 times more grassland bird species and birds living on their farms compared to their neighbors. Now, can these birds go wherever they want to go? Absolutely. So why were a lot more of them on this side of the fence versus the other? Habitat, right? Habitat. They know where to go. Pretty smart. There was also 33% more beneficial insect species diversity, 25% more microbial species diversity in the soil, and when we look at effective rainfall is rain that actually infiltrates into your soil. If it doesn't do that, it's just like you didn't get a rain. So if you get, down here, you get 50 plus inches of rain, but if you're infiltrating, a quarter or less of every inch every time it rains, folks, you're effectively a desert. And that's why many of you, and many in Mississippi where I live now, are always saying we're never more than 2 weeks away from a drought. How many times have you heard that? Right? No more than 2 weeks away from a drought. It's because we don't have those deeply aggregated soils and we're not able to infiltrate and retain that moisture. So what we found was that on average across all of the farms incorporated in this trial, that the regenerative farms infiltrated 2.3 times more rainfall per acre per hour. Now, down here in the deep south, how many days out of a year do we get rain that falls more than an hour a day? Quite a few, right? Okay, so this is 2.3 times more rainfall infiltration per acre per hour. Now that amounts to an additional 54,000 gallons of water per acre stored in your soil. So how does this impact flooding events? And how does this impact drought events? It begins to temper and mitigate both of those, doesn't it? Both of those. So it doesn't matter whether you're getting too much rain or you're not getting enough. If we can infiltrate and begin to retain water, we have these deeply aggregated soils, that radically changes this equation for the better for all of us. So now, I want to finish up by sharing this. And this is a third batch of research that we're doing. So ultimately, what are we all producing? Food. But you know what? There's way too many farmers and ranchers in the U.S. that don't view it that way. No, I'm producing weaned calves to sell at the auction barn. Okay? No, I'm producing grain that I sell at my local elevator. And that's how we've come to view ourselves as farmers and ranchers. We have even divorced ourselves from the fact that we're producers of food. And let me ask you this question. What percent of farmers and ranchers in the U.S. today actually eat food they grew on their own farm or ranch? Okay, now hopefully a lot of you in this room do. But you know that the vast majority do not, folks. If you're a corn and bean farmer, who in the world sits down to a plate of field corn for dinner at night? Or a bowl of field soybeans at night? Do any of you do that? I don't think so. That would not be a very pleasant meal. Okay? So, and many farmers don't even grow their own gardens anymore. Do you know how many ranchers I know that don't finish out a beef for themselves and their family? They feel like they got to sell every animal they produce every year to make the thing work. So that's the situation that we're in. So it is about food, and ultimately then, because it's about food, it's about nutrient density. And nutrient density is about a lot more than that nutrition facts panel that's printed on the back of the food or beverage. Okay, food, a packaged food product or packaged beverage product. Now, it's labeled nutrition facts, and I actually refer to it as nutrition fiction label. Okay, because if that's what we're going on to make our nutrition decisions, our dietary decisions, we are making an enormous mistake. Because, folks, you can make potato chips look like the greatest health food in the world with that nutrition facts panel. Okay? So what it's really about when we talk about nutrition is the micronutrients and the phytonutrients down here, guys. Okay? So what we're now doing, we're working with Dr. Stefan Van Vliet, Dr. Fred Provenza, and others to do the most comprehensive nutritional research that's ever been conducted. And again, we're looking at all of those factors, from the macronutrients to the micros to the phytonutrients. But what are phytonutrients and why are they so important? Well, phytonutrients are very powerful antioxidants and anti-inflammatories. Where does every disease, disorder, and malady known to human beings begin? With inflammation in the body, right? With inflammation. Nothing happens to you in terms of a disease or disorder that doesn't first start with inflammation. And then what it manifests itself in: heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, ALS, autoimmune, whatever. That is individual, how that inflammation impacts us and what it ultimately causes in our own bodies. So, we need these phytonutrients. So what we're doing, most nutritional research begins and ends where? Where? With a laboratory analysis of the food itself, the end product, right? And then that's usually it. And maybe they do a little human clinical trials or something, but that's about it. We're starting at the origin of the food, with the soil. Because all food starts with the soil. So we're out there actually collecting soil samples, and we're measuring chemical, physical, and biological and phytonutrient characteristics of the soil. Then we're watching these animals and what they're grazing, what plants they're eating, and even what part of those plants they're eating. And then we go collect that and analyze that. Then we're following them around, and this is the fun part, Sid. This is where you always need grad students to follow them around and collect the manure, right? So you watch, and shortly after they take a dump, that's when you want to collect the manure. Okay, so we collect the manure, and then we do the phytonutrient and total nutritional analysis on the end product: the beef, the pork, the eggs, the chicken, whatever it may be, the blueberries, the corn. And the fifth is human clinical trials. No other nutritional research has ever gone to this depth and this detail. And we're learning a ton. So let me share just a little bit of this data with you. And we've already got some peer-reviewed published articles out on this, and there are a lot more coming. So because this is ongoing. But let me share some of this research with you and these results. So what we've been doing is we've been comparing, conventional beef production to regenerative beef production and looking along the continuum. What happens here? What happens? So if you measure the typical TMR ration, and all of these are the TMR rations, okay? If you measure the typical TMR ration for phytonutrient profile, that's what we found. So they barely registered above the bar, right? Very, very low phytonutrient content. But when we looked at animals that were being finished on pastures that had decent soil health and diversity in those pastures, this is what we found: the green, the blue, and the red bars. So all of those, even though there were differences among these farms, they were all significantly greater in phytonutrient content than the animals that were finished on the TMR. So, but you do see differences. And I'll share with you in a little bit why we see some higher than others in what they're doing. Now, we also broke apart the TMR ration because there's multiple components in there. You can have corn in there, you can have DDGs, you can have soybeans, you can have wheat bits, so on and so forth. And then, of course, you got to have a roughage, so you grind hay and put that in the TMR as well. So as we parsed the individual ingredients apart and looked at the phytonutrient content, so for the phytonutrients that were there in the TMR ration, where were they principally coming from? So where were they coming from? From the hay that was being ground for the roughage, not the grains. Not the grains. Okay? And then if we look at a handful of key phytonutrients, you'll see again, compared to the animals on the TMR to the animals on the diverse pastures and biologically active soils, significantly higher content of these phytonutrients. And then if we look at the relationship with the soils, so again, remember, we went out and measured the soils and many different parameters of these soils on the pastures where the animals were finished, and then the row crop fields where the TMR rations were produced. Now, to me, this data is very ironic. So, what do we see here? So we see soil organic matter higher in the pastures than in the row crop fields, total exchange capacity higher, and then zinc, iron, phosphorus, potassium, and a lot of the other elements were also higher in the pastures versus the row crop fields. Now, why did I make the statement that I find this data very ironic? What was happening in every one of those row crop fields that wasn't happening in the pastures? Okay, every one of those row crop farmers were fertilizing according to soil tests, so they were buying and applying synthetic fertilizers and even on top of that, manures, stored manures. What was being applied to these pastures? No purchased or brought in fertility at all. It was all fertility dropping straight out the rear end of the animals that were actively grazing, and that was it. Do you not find that ironic as well? Here's another irony. We found that many of the vitamins in the end product were significantly higher in the animals finished on the diverse pasture compared to the animals finished on TMR. Now, why is this ironic? What's always in every TMR? Anybody in here a ruminant nutritionist? Or you don't want to admit it? Okay, what is in every TMR, guys? Right, a vitamin mineral pre-pack is always added, right? A vitamin mineral pre-pack is always added. So how is it then that if their TMRs were supplemented to meet the requirements of these vitamins that are needed, it didn't translate into the end product? There was no vitamin mineral pre-pack fed to the animals on pasture. So how did they have a higher vitamin content? Not on these farms, no, Cliff. There wasn't. Yeah. Nope. Obviously, it didn't. But now the qualifier for that, Cliff, is that these soils were very biologically active. They weren't at the beginning of their journey, okay, and they had really diverse pastures with that included a lot of forbs. Yeah, that matters. That matters a lot. And so many of those plants were deeply rooted. Okay? So let's take a brief look here, and then I'll go to questions. So again, some key phytonutrients, comparing the animals on the diverse pastures and the biologically active soils to those on a TMR. You can see higher, right? And then if we look at the fatty acid difference, the omega-3s, the CLAs, the omega-6 to 3 ratio, you can see we were higher where we needed to be higher and significantly lower in that omega-6 to 3 ratio where we need to be lower, right? And then if we look at vitamin content, again, you see the same thing. Significantly higher in all of these animals compared to the animals on the TMR. So guys, here's the bottom line, the absolute bottom line. These, after doing all of that research, all of those trials, and adding in the phytonutrient research that we're doing, what we're seeing over and over again is that the principal keys to a strong phytonutrient profile in our animal proteins are soil microbial biomass and profile, and that means we've got to get that fungal component in there. That's critical. And plant species diversity. Those two things are absolutely core. If we build those two things into our farms, into our ranches, then we are building foods that are very powerful from a phytonutrient standpoint. Now I can tell you, I know a number of you in here direct market just like I do. And I can tell you that when I share this data on our beef and lamb and pork and chicken and eggs and turkeys and all that we produce and sell, it makes a significant difference with our customer base. As soon as they see this data, one of their immediate reactions is, I will never buy my beef or whatever from anybody else ever again. So for those of you that are direct marketing, this data is also powerful for you. Okay? Now within Regenerative, which again is our regenerative verification and aggregation company, this data is also making a huge difference. And so within Regenerative, we are now working in more than 30 countries, including the U.S., obviously, in verifying regenerative principles and practices on farms and ranches and orchards and vineyards and so forth. And this data is included in that verification. And what we are finding is that with the bigger buyers, like Whole Foods Markets, and over in Europe, Waitrose, which is a large retail grocery chain there, and with many branded programs here in the U.S., both on the grain side, like King Arthur Milling, Simple Mills, Miller's Milling, and many others, this is making a difference. And with animal protein branded programs, this data is now making a difference. And it's changing the way they market to their customer base. So again, this can make a huge difference for all of us, and it can make an enormous difference for everyone's health. Because if we now have this data and people know how to select the foods that they purchase and consume, then we can radically transform our own health and the health of our children and the health of our grandchildren. How many of you have heard of epigenetics? Okay, quite a few of you. So all of this radically influences epigenetics, either for the positive or the negative. And with epigenetics, we're either producing positive or negative effects, right? And epigenetics are transgenerational in nature. So research has shown that we have traced epigenetic effects through 14 generations. 14 generations. And a very, very recent human epigenetic trial just was published by Tulane University, okay, that was tracking the eating habits of parents through multiple generations. And so far, they have found that poor eating habits by parents impact at least through 4 generations of their progeny. Okay? So you want to know how this matters? This matters. So, I'm going to stop there. This is, to us, very profound. We're continuing to publish this, so you can follow this on our website and the rootsodeep.org website, and we'll be providing, ongoing, as new research is peer-reviewed and published, we'll be providing this. So, questions? Yes?
What are the sideboards on a regenerative ag bee farm?
What are the sideboards?
Meaning, what makes it no fertilizer, or what are the key elements of that?
Yeah, so it goes back to the 634. Okay, so how well are you adhering to the 6 principles? Which means, again, know your context, minimizing disturbance. That means minimize overgrazing, minimize, too frequent return to grazing. Bob, when he was up here in the very first presentation, talked about that. Way too many grazers are not only not letting their forages recover from the previous grazing event before they're grazing again, but they're not providing rest. And recovery and rest are very different things. You got to first recover, then add rest on top of recovery. And not a lot of people are doing that, unfortunately. So that's part of minimizing disturbance, right? Minimizing disturbance. Then living root in the ground year-round, keeping the soil covered or armored. Diversity, so we need more and more diversity out there. And that animal integration. Okay, so you're verified based on your adherence and your improvement in those 6 principles, and then the 3 rules. So how well are you producing positive compounding effects or negative compounding effects? Are you introducing planned purposeful disruptions to continue to make ongoing progress? And again, are you increasing diversity? And then you're gauged on how well you're capturing the 4 ecosystem processes. We take, within Regenerative, our team there takes more than 65 different measurements on any farm that they verify. And then you're given a windshield report against all of those back. And we designed it so regenerative, y'all, is a journey, not a destination. Okay, you begin wherever you are. And if you've had a high reliance on supplements, synthetics, chemicals, whatever, that's okay. You can begin the journey. Okay, you're not required to stop. This is not organic. This is regenerative, and it's a journey. So you can start wherever you are. The whole key with regenerative is that you're making consistent, steady improvement year over year. And the Regenerative verification is set up that way. It's a tiered system so that you can begin in tier 1, and then you have so many years to get to tier 2, so many years to get to tier 3, and so on and so forth. And the goal here is to reduce your reliance on outside inputs while building resilience and productivity through the native biology and diversity that exists. Does that answer the question? Okay. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
It's multifaceted. Number one is I believe I have a bacterial dominant soil. How do I get more fungal production? I've done, years ago I did a baseline, and they said they had to use a micron telescope or microscope to find the fungus. So I see you're testing fungus. I'd like to figure that out, how to test for it. Number two, you showed a picture of dung beetles. I've been working for years to get dung beetles. Minimal. Very happy that I've seen them in other locations. Thought about importing them. And I've worked through the whole spectrum of dewormers, trying to figure that out. Number 3 is, how in the world do you reach that customer that needs that nutritious food? Young children. The housewives are so conditioned to grab and go, convenience. How do you reach them?
3 very good questions. I'm going to repeat them and work through them one by one. Okay, so his first question was, he believes his soils are bacterially dominated, and how does he get that fungal component in there? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, number 1, you're right. Okay? We have done hundreds of thousands of biological soil tests around North America. And the vast majority of our soils, whether we're talking about livestock enterprises or agronomic enterprises, the vast majority of our soils are bacterially dominated now. We have a very, very poor fungal component in most of our soils. And when I say bacterially dominated, so we're using a test, it's easy to do. It's called a PLFA test, phospholipid fatty acid test, okay? And you just collect soil samples like you would for any other soil test. And then specific labs have the capability to perform the PLFA test. So you don't have to use microscopy and all of this. And it actually gives us a more accurate total component count versus microscopy. With microscopy, I can identify it, but I can't tell you how much is there. Okay? But through the PLFA test, I can tell you how much is there, how much is actually residing in nanograms per gram of soil. Okay, so that's the first step, is to know where you're at. But folks across North America, the average, out of hundreds of thousands of these tests, the average percent bacterial component is between 93 and 95%. That means that your fungal component is under 7%, and that's nowhere near enough. We need to get that fungal component up to a bare minimum of 10%, and preferably between 20 and 30% of the total microbial community in your soil. That's where things really start to happen. All of that data I presented, that's where all that good stuff begins to happen. You get that fungal component between 20 and 30%, and it's a game changer in your soil. Okay, so how do you do that? You do that through several things. Number 1, the 634. Okay, so minimizing disturbance of all kinds, chemical, synthetic, overgrazing, tillage, all of those types of things, because they all damage your fungal population in the soil. Number 2, diversity. You've got to increase the diversity of what you've got out there. If it's a pasture, we understand that. Far greater diversity in the perennial species that are out there. And we can begin that process using annuals as biological primers. Okay, so annual diverse mixes. Then, if you're in cropping, okay, then you need much greater diversity in your cash crop rotation. You know, corn and beans and corn and beans and corn and beans is not really a rotation anymore, folks. Okay, don't count. You've got to have more diversity than that. And then in between the cash crops, you've got to have highly diverse covers in there. Okay, that matters a lot. So then animal impact, and the right animal impact. And we don't have time to go deeply into that today, but I can discuss more, and y'all are all welcome to contact us to discuss it more one-on-one. But those are the keys. The second question was dung beetles. Okay, so pretty much every chemical dewormer out there is going to harm your dung beetle population. Some to a lesser extent than others, but they all are going to harm it. Okay, so what we have an article on our website called "Don't Let It Bug You: 6 Steps to Parasite Control." So if you want to know how to control parasites without having to use chemical dewormers and to use, the means that we already have in front of us every day, then you can go to that website and take a look at that article. And that article lays out those 6 steps. Okay, so that'll answer the question there and help you with building your dung-beetle population. The third one is, how do you reach the public? How do you reach the mothers? How do you reach the families? And how do we reach people today, guys? So the organizers of this meeting, how did you reach more people this year? Social media. Exactly. That's what everybody looks at, listens to. It's got to be short, sweet, to the point. Because everybody's attention span these days is what? Not like that, right? So short, sweet, to the point, and hook them and bring them in. But it works. It works because we have been very successful at reaching our customer, our target, and bringing in more and more. And many of our clients have been successful. So it's all about how can you properly use social media and the proper content that's going to interest them and bring them in.
So I'm assuming you're from a small rural community,
That's correct.
and most of us are the same.
Yep.
Are you shipping?
Oh, yes, sir. We're shipping, we're doing home delivery, so we actually do home delivery within a 150-mile radius, and then beyond that, we'll ship. So we'll pick, pack, fulfill, and ship beyond that. Yes, sir.
And this is in your website?
Yeah, we've got webinars and things on marketing and that kind of thing, but anything that you may not find, you need our help on, again, go to understandingag.com. Y'all can contact us, and we'll help walk you through anything that you have. I know our time is up. One more question. Well, we had one over here. Okay, all right here. Then Cliff, I'll get you real quick.
Discerning taste tests, with the pallets, are people still asking you to finish it with corn for a month before they take it to slaughter? The taste tests, they've been great, and there's marbling with all cows with this type of grazing.
Yeah, so here's the beautiful thing about high phytonutrient content that also translates into flavonoids in the food. Okay, so you actually get a much more rich, robust flavor complex that people love and chefs love, because we sell a lot of restaurants. Okay, so it matters. And yes, on our cattle, we finish them to USDA choice and up on grass. So we're not harvesting lean cattle. We're harvesting choice and up. And on our pigs, we get them marbled up too. We don't want a lean pig, because our customer doesn't want a lean pig. They want that marbling, that rich marbling in there. And then the final question is to Cliff.
I'm living up there in the middle of row crop country. I'm selling cows, and it's scale operation in the middle of row crop country. These fungicides that they spray indiscriminately on the corn crop and the soybean crop around there, do they affect our pasture fungi?
Absolutely they do, because there is drift. And that drift is very real, and we've tracked that a lot. And dicamba's the worst about drift. Okay? But make no mistake, you've got glyphosate drift, you've got, all of them drift. And so yes, that does. That absolutely does. And you can see that integration into pastures and so forth. We've actually measured that quite a bit, and how deep, when you're bordered by row crop fields, how deep does that drift actually go into pastures and impact them. So it is very real. Yes. Okay, thank y'all very much. I know my time is up.